and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I am Liz Cavell, Deputy Legal Director at FFRF, and today we're going to talk about what we American secularists can learn from what's happening in the world's largest secular democracy right now, India. I am joined by FFRF's Director of Communications, Amit Pal.
Thank you, Liz.
He thinks, writes, teaches, and talks about Indian politics very frequently, so he's going to help me understand. Hi, Amit. As always, we want to hear what you're thinking about our topics today, so please leave your questions in the Facebook chat below, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So, Amit, we are talking about India today because they're about to wrap up national elections. So voting ends on June 1st, and it is the largest election the world has ever seen with like almost 1 billion eligible voters, right? And 6 weeks of voting that's about to wrap up. The stakes of the election are really, really high. India is the world's largest secular democracy since its independence in 1947. It has a parliamentary system of government, which, Amit, you will help explain in a moment. But we're going to start first with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So you're going to give us the American-Indian viewpoint of what's going on in Indian politics, but we wanted to plug another point of view before we get started that actually was in the New York Times today. Tell us about that.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. It's a great day for me to be on the show. Since it's my daughter's birthday, younger daughter's birthday, so happy birthday, Devika.
Happy birthday!
And yes, Dan Barker, FFRF co-president, and I met a very impressive activist in New Delhi during our travels in India a year and a half ago. And since then, I've interviewed her a couple of times, including on Free Thought Radio. Just a few weeks ago, her name is Shabnam Hashmi, and she is in the New York Times today itself for her activism. And if you want a supplemental perspective from on the ground, in the thick of things, from somebody fighting the good fight, please listen to that May 2nd interview that I did with her for Free Thought Radio. It's on our website.
Yes, great. That is such a good synchronicity going on as we're talking about this. And that interview sounds really interesting. I know you and Dan were very impressed when you met Hashmi in India. So we're talking about the Indian elections. We have talked about actually Modi and what's going on in India on this show before, you and I. Right now, he and his political party, the BJP, are seeking a third consecutive term. Yeah. They are a Hindu nationalist party. So can you just explain a little background on what's been going on in India for Modi's past 2 terms? How have the secular and democratic traditions in India been eroding over that time?
I'll have to give our viewers a mini history lesson. So let's go back to 1925, and if you can have the visual up of the fountainhead of the ruling party. Its name is the RSS. And its founding was in 1925, partly inspired by Mussolini's Italy. And they held Nazi Germany in high esteem.
You can see the resemblance.
Absolutely. In fact, we've had on Free Thought Radio Italian scholar Marzia Casolari, who unveiled many of the connections, including the fact that Mussolini personally met with some of the founders. He actually, I did not know this, he knew English fairly well. He had a lot of time on his hands. And so he met with these folks from India.
Okay.
And exactly, and they were inspired by the organizational structure of especially his youth organizations. And they founded the RSS, a Hindu nationalist organization with fascist underpinnings. Narendra Modi has been a member of the RSS. Now, this will boggle your mind, since he was 7 years old.
Wow.
I know. So he's totally steeped in that ideology.
Yeah.
And he moved over to the party, so to speak, much later. And that party has been heading India and destroying its secular underpinnings for a decade now.
So Hindu nationalism has taken hold in India. We have talked about the rise of Christian nationalism in the U.S. And I always wonder sort of how you think about what's going on with the rise of Christian nationalism in the U.S. and how it sort of compares, or what parallels you've seen between kind of what's already happened with the rise of Hindu nationalism in India and what we're seeing currently in the U.S. with Christian nationalism taking hold and kind of taking aim at so many of our institutions as well.
So yeah, Liz, I taught a class on the rise of right-wing populism around the world. And I have a book in the making, long, but still it's a long way off till its culmination. But the United States, Brazil, Turkey, India, so such disparate societies and yet afflicted, so to speak, by the same phenomenon of right-wing populism, with religion playing a major role, or in the case of India, almost pretty much the central role in that phenomenon. These leaders being populists, challenging the system, the status quo from the outside, purporting to represent the will of the people, and against the elite, be it the United States or India. In India, the westernized British style elite. In the United States, the inside the Beltway crowd, and saying that we're going to take them on your behalf.
Right. So how much of the Indian Hindu nationalist project is about sort of the kinds of things that you see the Christian nationalist project focusing on, like these kind of social conservative type issues, or issues around kind of rejecting secularism and rejecting not necessarily other religious minorities, which I know obviously is a big feature of what's going on in India, but like just social marginalized communities like the LGBTQ community, or just the non-religious, or big cultural war issues like abortion issues. Like, how much of the social conservatism is part of the Hindu nationalist project, or is it different in that way?
Yeah. To the extent that there are similarities, it's about identity and about you coalescing into a group defined by hatred and animus toward the other. That's the parallel. So socially conservative kind of obsessions here, such as abortion, etc., are not a mainstay in India. So it's about your group being defined in opposition to the other, and being assured dominance, and the other groups at best living in the country at your sufferance and at your due to your goodwill, so to speak. So that's the defining issue in India, basically.
I see. And so my understanding, which is admittedly shallow, but just from following the news, is that the biggest divide, the biggest minority group, and the biggest kind of foil for that dominant Hindu group is the Muslim population in India. Is it really just a focus on the in-group and the out-group, or are there other minority groups besides Muslims in India that are sort of equally suffering second-class citizen status?
Yes, Liz. So the two religions that the BJP and the RSS and the Hindu nationalists are really have animosity for are Islam and Christianity, because they can't be subsumed into the notion of Indic religions, such as Sikhism or Buddhism, which are supposedly junior religions of Hinduism, because they were founded in India. So these two, Islam and Christianity, but increasingly even the Sikh faith, which is has come under attack because they have risen up in farmers' protests against the government. So they were vilified, and the Indian government has been caught in assassination plots on Sikh activists in the United States and Canada.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so it's the list of enemies is increasing over time.
Yeah. So you're kind of talking about describing India, and is kind of triggering some parallels with what we are all experiencing in the U.S. for me. So tell me if this sounds kind of right to you. It sounds like one of the things that the two kind of projects seem to have in common is it really is the ideology is pushing this kind of fusing of the religious identity and the patriotic nationalist identity, right?
Absolutely.
Like you can't be a true American if you're not Christian, and it sounds like that's really what is being pushed in the BJP ideology, but with the Hindu faith is like essential to the Indian identity.
You can only be a true patriot if your motherland and fatherland, in other words, from where your religion came and your country are the same.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you cannot be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So by definition, Muslims and Christians are suspect.
Yeah. I mean, that raises so many kind of, it's such a cautionary tale of what we're seeing that's ascendant in the Christian nationalists and the far right movement here, because that is where I think there's so much damage to be done, where you really capture that like nationalist fervor
Yes.
For a religious ideology,
Yes.
and it's just so combustible. And you're talking about one other thing that just kind of raises the alarm for me, that I think is similar to what is happening with the Christian Nationalist Project, which is you mentioned kind of what's been uncovered with the assassination of Sikhs abroad in the diaspora, not even inside India. And that has to do with people in the Indian diaspora that are just speaking out against the government or the status quo in India. And it kind of has to do with the kind of tearing down of dissent and the institutions that make dissent possible, or that, disseminate dissenting opinions. We see that happening right in the sort of the fascist Christian nationalist far right branch of American politics, which is attacking all of the institutions and the dissenting opinions and sort of how those things go together, right? It's the media is biased, and anyone that's dissenting against the Christian nationalist movement is, a liar or fake or, not worthy of humanity. And it kind of sounds like that's the project in India.
Liz, unfortunately, that project is much further along in India. India is a younger democracy. The guardrails, so to speak, have not been as sturdy. So the judiciary, the media, opposition voices, all of them are under much more concerted attack in India than they ever have been in the United States. And Shabnam Hashmi calls India currently a semi-fascist system. So it's really very worrisome. And let's hope that these election results, to be announced on June 4th, Tuesday, and I'll be having Shabnam on WART, the Madison Community Radio Station, to discuss the results if people are interested.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So yes, 15 years of the BJP. I mean, can you imagine one party being, or one man being in power for that long, and the amount of damage that this person can cause, especially if that person thinks that he's been sent by God.
Right.
So Modi recently said that he was not born biologically, which is odd. It's insulting to his parents, actually. He doesn't even realize that. I mean, and that he's been sent by God to do a mission. That's how messianic and how megalomaniacal this person is. It's
and
very
that's
worrisome.
really, I mean, that is where you see the fascist playbook, right?
Yeah.
It's the I am, and of course that echoes what we've heard in the United States, which is, I am the savior, I'm the only one that can, return India to its former glory. And it really has to do with sort of, in large part, like the kind of cult of personality around the fascist leader. So I'm wondering, I mentioned at the top, Amit, that like some other democracies in the world, but unlike the U.S., the way that the prime minister is elected is different because it's a parliamentary system. We were talking a little off camera about the polling and whether or not there's any hope in this election of staving off, a fully unified Hindu nationalist power. And I'm just wondering, like, what your thoughts are on that, or what you know about what the people of India think or feel about the BJP and Modi at this point.
So Liz, both the United States and India got their independence from the same country, but the United States got it much, much earlier. So the imprint of the British on India's political system is much more.
Right.
So like the British system, it's a parliamentary system where you elect your representatives to parliament and they choose a leader.
Right.
You're not directly voting for Modi or the opposition candidate. Before the elections were announced, it seemed Modi would be a shoe-in, so to speak. But it seems more and more that there is discontent. No jobs. No jobs. I mean, inequality. New study came out by Thomas Piketty. He's a French scholar, that India is at least as unequal, if not more, than when the British ruled India.
Yeah.
COVID, 5 million lives lost. No attempt to fix the system. I mean, one can go on and on. Climate change. Temperatures in Delhi today reached, I am not making this up, maybe 120 Fahrenheit.
No.
Yes. I mean, this seems insane. I checked, it was 52 Celsius. I mean, that's almost, unbearable for human beings.
Yeah.
What's your proposal for that?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, so all of this, people are finally thinking that Modi built a temple very near my family home in the state of Uttar Pradesh at the site of Ayodhya. We have a visual of him offering prayers. Not only did he get that temple built, he was actually the chief priest, pretty much as people have pointed out. For some time, people thought that would be enough to get him re-elected. But that may or may not be the case. I don't want to make predictions, especially since the Election Commission also has been subverted. The money power that the BJP has is unprecedented. So it's not a level playing field.
Right.
Yeah. And the opposition in India, interestingly, is headed by, so you have to grant them points for a clever acronym. It's India.
Oh, okay.
Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance.
Okay.
Yes. So that's a coalition of parties that's come together because they know it's the only way to defeat the BJP, headed by the Congress Party, which has been around since the time of Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru is a hero of ours at FFRF, a secular, agnostic political leader who was the Prime Minister of India for 17 years.
Wow.
And Modi keeps on berating him in public regularly. We make fun of Trump for going after Obama, but Nehru died in 1964 and they still keep on going after him because they can't stand the fact that he gave India a secular constitution that respected all religions and that did not make Hinduism the official religion. So this is it's good and bad that the Congress Party is headed by his great-grandson. So that tarnish of dynasty is there. But as Shabnam told me on the radio, during the radio interview, he's probably the most secular leader India has had after Nehru. So there is hope that if he comes to power, that he'll at least undo some of the damage that Modi has and his party have done over the past 10 years.
So what needs to happen for kind of like full majority control for Modi's party would be like a 2/3 majority of the parliament or something like that? Like what would stave off the like full unified control of the BJP? What would have to happen in the election?
So there are about 545 seats. 2, I think, are nominated. 543, he has to win half of those. And certainly the higher it is than that number, the more confident he is that he can change. So he started talking about changing the constitution, which scared off a lot of people. So now he's backing off from that.
I see.
And hopefully it won't be that. And he's also heading a coalition called the National Democratic Alliance. The other parties in that are not necessarily Hindu nationalist, but they're along for the ride.
Got it.
And they haven't been in opposition to any of his changes over the past 10 years. Yeah. So let's hope that's the hope, that he will not reach the threshold of 272 or so. Yeah.
Got it. So we have activists that are on the ground in India that are saying this is already a semi-fascist state.
Yeah.
There's already been so much erosion to democratic traditions and norms and system and institutions, and secularism is on frontal attack.
Yeah.
So and so much of that involves discriminating against minority groups, and as you mentioned, like actively harming dissenters.
Yes.
So nevertheless, we see on the world stage, Modi has been sort of embraced, literally and figuratively. Apparently, Modi is a hugger. And so we have, you see him, he's made U.S. visits, and he's been given a state visit by both parties in this country. Why don't we see more of a rejection or kind of a pushback from other democratic leaders in the world of this government, when some of the other countries you talked about where fascism is ascendant, we do see some of that. Other kind of wannabe fascists around the world have not been necessarily embraced in the way that Modi has. So why?
So yeah, Liz, with Trump, it wasn't surprising.
Right.
They were kindred spirits.
Yes.
And they had an equation. Modi came to the U.S. in Houston in the fall of 2019 and pretty much endorsed Trump.
Remember Howdy Modi?
Howdy Modi, exactly, exactly. But with Biden, it shows that the support for him is bipartisan. India is now the most populous country in the world and is seen as a counterweight to China. It's seen as a big market for U.S. products, ranging from weapons to consumer goods. And then this is interesting, as scholars have told me, Modi doesn't even realize this. He's still feeding off of the legacy of the democratic institutions and the democratic image that Nehru bequeathed to India. Yeah. So all of these combined makes India still on the right side of the United States and the West.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about, let me check and see if we have any questions, because I want to have time to go on off on some other topics that audience might be thinking about. Oh, this is interesting. So is there anything in India, does India have anything like a Project 2025 counterpart? And I think sort of the question here is, do we know, or has it already been telegraphed, like if Modi and the BJP fully consolidates power in this election, what is the future for India? Like, should Indians expect their constitution will be changed and their secular democracy will be officially turned into a sectarian state?
So one has to understand this major difference between the United States and India. Here, one of the parties is in alliance with the Christian nationalists. There, the fountainhead of the ruling party is itself a Hindu nationalist organization. And they have been working in tandem over the past 10 years to infiltrate all the institutions. The chancellors of the major universities, including this very progressive university called the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, are RSS figures or like-minded folks. Just to give one example, the army schools are now being handed over. These are schools which act as feeders for people wanting to join the armed forces. And they're now being given over to the RSS and Hindu nationalist organizations. So textbooks are being changed. So every level, there's already been tremendous change and is going to accelerate, including the possible changing of the constitution. So to even get rid of the word secular in the constitution completely. So that's certainly a possibility.
Wow. Well, here's a question from Dan Barker, our very own upstairs. And actually, it's a good question for those of us. We're already non-religionists in America, but of course we're in the West, so maybe a little clueless about Hinduism. But Dan asks, I thought Hinduism was a very broad and diverse system of thought. Is Hinduism clearly or narrowly enough defined to be a focus for identity? How is it thought about in Indian identity?
Such a great question. And that's why that temple was built. So they have taken one deity, Ram, from the pantheon of Hindu deities, tried to make him be the central figure akin to Allah or Jesus. And it is so interesting that they are copying the religions that they deplore, and trying to have a central book, a central deity, and people following the religion in a particular way, and mimicking their foes in the process. So there is that whole process of changing Hinduism from a diverse, eclectic kind of belief system into almost a monotheistic faith.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating.
So for actual Indians who have been Hindu all their lives, is that easy for Hindus to follow along? Is that blasphemous? Is that, how do regular everyday people who have been Hindu all their lives react to sort of those changes in just being told by their political leaders how to reorient their faith?
That is why the BJP project has limitations. For example, in southern India, they do not follow Ram. They have their own deities. There's it's a complete wipeout almost for the BJP. The problem is that northern India is much more populated and they have their base there. But that's my hope, that they've reached their limit and that because they have little chance in much of India, that it's going to be a losing battle for them this time.
Yeah. So isn't there, I mean, I know Hindus are the overwhelming majority, but obviously we talked at the top that India is the most populous nation. Even though the Muslim population, for example, is a minority, they do have majority Muslim states in India. Is that not right? I mean,
one, Kashmir. Yeah.
So aren't we talking about a lot of people and a lot of potential voters when we're talking about non-Hindu Indians?
And the BJP is very conscious of that, Liz, which is why, and we've discussed that on Free Thought Matters, etc. They introduced this bill called the Citizenship Amendment Act to disenfranchise potentially at least some of the Muslim population in India. I don't want to get into much of the detail. That's an entirely separate discussion. But if you're able to bring down the numbers even somewhat in at least some of the constituencies, then the major oppositional voting bloc that you have, you manage to cancel them.
And it's so, it's partly disheartening, but it's also somewhat reassuring that really this authoritarianism, sectarian state project is out of a playbook because, talk about parallels to the playbook of the Christian nationalist right in our country. A big part of, step one, or I don't know, one of the steps is disenfranchising voters.
Absolutely.
There's more audience questions, but I have so many questions that I'm just going to ask my own because I want them answered. In the U.S., we think of, and I think it's backed up by polling, and of course it's not, like you said, the Christian nationalist ideology is not one and the same of, the Conservative Party in this nation, although they are allied. But the ideology itself is not popular. It's not a majority of Americans. It really relies on disenfranchisement and minority rule, a constitutional order that gives minority rule outsized power. What is the feeling in India when it comes to the Hindu nationalist ideology? Is it as popular as do most Hindus agree or back a Hindu nationalist India?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, Liz, because this is my defense of the Indian voting population. The BJP has never gotten more than 38% of the vote.
Really?
But the problem is that it's not just the Congress party. There are a lot of oppositional, at least vaguely secular parties, which are not Hindu nationalist. The vote gets divided, which is why Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, and they're having the seat sharing and understandings all over India so that they don't cut each other's vote, which is why I'm hopeful that they'll be able to prevail this time.
Okay. Well, that gets to this question, which is, do you think there's hope for India? But the follow-up is, are there outspeaking secular advocates that are allowed to express criticism of the government within India, like Hashmi, and or in the diaspora?
They're harassed.
Yeah.
They are increasingly under trouble, under scrutiny. If you're really famous, like Nehru's great-grandson Rahul Gandhi, you can sort of get away with it, but even he was barred from parliament for some of the statements that he made. So yes, they're increasingly under siege. There's no doubt about it, and the spaces are shrinking, but it's not China or Russia yet.
Right.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
Do Indian, like, just sort of their political culture, do Indians sort of like recoil at the idea of free speech being infringed and censorship? Like, is that something that Indians balk at? Is it something that the BJP does secretly or quietly? I mean, obviously the things they were doing on Canadian soil are trying to be done undercover, but what about when they're censoring outspoken critics and dissenters in India?
There's been a proud tradition of democracy in India since 1947. Once in the mid-70s, when there was an overtly authoritarian form of government for a year and a half, and elections were then scheduled, they defeated that government overwhelmingly. So here they rely partly on stealth, partly on media misinformation because the major media are all with them, and partly people are willing to give up all that for a strong man, not a strong person, a strong man, who is, in their view, safeguarding the national interests as they construe it, which is, of course, Hindu interests.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of all that.
Yeah. Again, it's the playbook, right? It's the strong. It's the sort of playing up on like the fear and the threats and the differences and the change and globalization.
Yes, all of that.
Wanting protection and security.
Yes.
Which is why when you see unemployment rise and all of these other issues really coming to the fore, it doesn't work as well. You start to, hopefully see some sinking popularity for Modi when people are realizing like they aren't very well protected. There's not a lot of jobs. There's income inequality. Things aren't secure.
I'm not making this up. They had an interview with an upper middle class person saying the poor, look at the poor, they don't know how to vote. They vote on nonsense issues such as price rise and inflation. They don't know what's most important is the nation and and nationalism. I was like, dude, you have it, completely upside down. Easy for you to say. So exactly, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think the results of you touched on this. Do you think the results of the Indian election are going to be fair? Is there a danger that they'll be corrupt? Like, how free and fair are the election institutions still in India? Because it is, we talked at the top, a marvel of a democratic feat to hold elections for 1 billion people. And we know that institutions have been more than chipped away at, assaulted by the Modi government over the past, dozen years. Do you think the results of the Indian election will be, by and large, fair?
First of all, as I said, Liz, it's not a level playing field. It's tilted in so many ways because institutions have been subverted. Second, as Shabnam told me, there's a huge concern about the manipulation of the electronic voting machines.
Okay.
Yeah. So, one never knows. Yeah. And throughout the election process, the way the Election Commission of India has conducted itself does not lend you confidence.
Yeah.
So it is certainly worrisome and a very, very real possibility that the election results will not be necessarily completely free and fair.
Okay. This is probably a good question to get us talking for closing thoughts. What lessons, and we've touched on this, but let's see if we can distill it. What lessons do you think secular advocates here should learn from India to prevent state-church separation from falling in America? I know it's not apples to apples. The Indian secular democracy is so much younger. But we do see parallels and the same playbook with the far right here. What are the lessons? What's the cautionary tale? The things that have already happened in India that have made this such a precarious moment. What could we learn?
As I think Shabnam and the other activists on the ground in India would say, never be complacent. It was unthinkable till the 1980s in India that the Hindu nationalists would ever gain power, especially after one of them killed none other than Mahatma Gandhi. Mm-hmm. He was a member of the RSS. It was thought that they'd be discredited forever. So you have to be always on the ground, mobilizing, educating people, telling them the truths, and combating this phenomenon day in and day out. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are no shortcuts.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. I'm so grateful to you for coming on today after I ambushed you after your long vacation. So thank you, Amit, and for being our expert. I always love to learn about this topic from you. It's so important. So many people are affected. The world's largest democracy, and we want to keep it that way. And of course, the cautionary tale for we in America who are also under the threat of Christian nationalist, sectarian state, and of course with the fascist underpinning, that's so dangerous and such a threat to our cherished secular democracy. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz.
That concludes Ask an Atheist for this week. We hope you'll listen to Free Thought Radio. You just heard Amit talk about all the wonderful things you can hear there. This week, Annie, Lori, and Dan spoke with Susan R. Berry, author of Dear Oliver, An Unexpected Friendship with Oliver Sacks. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio. And check out the latest episode of our We Dissent podcast. In our latest episode, we discuss the anti-abortion case being considered by the Supreme Court. You can listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you listen to podcasts, or check us out online at we-dissent.org. And if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're already a member, thank you. And if not, please join us. We will see you next week on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.